So here's some of my favorite best practices on the adaptation side. Obviously modeling climate impacts and building proper plans for adaptation. Embed adaptation into building codes and other codes of the city. For example, green roofs could be required of buildings over a certain size. Convertible parking structures, in Amsterdam, they're actually requiring all underground parking structures to be designed so that they can actually house water in times of flooding. So the cars will be displaced or put on the street or elsewhere, and the parking structures will actually become containers of water. Elevated development I've already mentioned. Floodable development I mentioned, the floodable parks that Curitiba's done. And I think this is a really good one that we're not doing enough of. How can we find, we need to focus more on solutions that have a mitigation and an adaptation component to it. That is, they actually help reduce the amount of emissions we're putting in the atmosphere, and simultaneously actually address our risks of climate change. So some of those are things like distributed energy and smart grid and smart water. Why does that work? Because we're going to have more power outages when we have more storms. We're already seeing. And power outages cost money. They also cost lives. People lose access to air conditioners and extreme heat, and various other maladies happen as a result. So if you have distributed energy and it's renewable, you're mitigating climate change, you're reducing your emissions, but you're also reducing your vulnerability to climate-related storm events. Parks and trees, I already discussed how they serve both purposes. They sequester carbon and they address water issues. And local food is a huge one. And obviously you can use local food to grow your economy. Our current food basket travels 2,500 miles right now. Major emissions associated with our food system. We reduce our emissions, we grow our local economy, and we're creating a more adaptive, resilient local economy that can survive. You know, what happens if peak oil or other climate, temperatures rise, more demand on oil, prices go up. We've seen this already. Food prices go up, more people starve. If you have more local food production, you're less dependent on fossil fuel and less dependent on a transportation system, making your economy more resilient. This sort of food for thought, last slide here, kind of interesting. All 4 of these cities are actually in the top 10 in my study. If the world's population lived in a city as dense as these 4 cities, that's how much of the world's landmass we would actually need to house the entire planet. I'm not necessarily advocating the whole world lives in the state of Texas. I wouldn't want to live there. But you get my point. We could be a lot more dense. We could be a lot smarter about how we develop our societies. So that's the presentation. I'd like to open it up for a discussion about that.
So that we can get as many people joining the conversation, that would be great. Thank you.
Do we want more light for this? Not that anyone needs to see me better, but I would like to. Yes?
Yeah, you talk about the need for courageous politicians, and you talk about a business opportunity or economic opportunity, and it just seems far-fetched to me. I can't speak to the Canadian example, but in the United States, after September 11th, 2001, Thomas Friedman began writing weekly that the solution to U.S. foreign policy problems, and by the way to grow the economy, was to get off of oil and onto alternative energies. Barack Obama ran for president about 7 years later with the promise of growing the U.S. economy by transitioning from the stale industrial base into being the world leader in the green economy. Never happened. Notwithstanding the huge economic pressures on the U.S. right now, particularly with respect to growth and jobs. How's that going to happen in a country like Canada, where the political power base is based in the Texas of Canada, with politicians who are far from courageous, but entrapped by those petro-based interests?
The question is very valid, and obviously we've seen failed policy in North America, north and south of the border. And Canada's policy is even worse than the US, because Canada's policy is stated that we'll just do whatever the US does with climate change. That's their stated federal policy is our US is too big of an important trading partner and all the rest of it, and so we need to have all of our markets tied together, and so we're not going to do anything until the US does anything. The US is mired in the worst political quagmire they've been in a long time, where they can't get anything done, so Canada won't do anything because the US won't do anything. So this goes back to my point about why cities is a topic of so much importance, because at a federal level or multilateral level, it's failed. In North America, it's failed. But you know, if you look even at nation state, even Australia, which has had their issues, they're now coming out with a carbon tax at a federal level. You look at nation states around the world, Sweden's trying to be fossil fuel free by 2020. So if you take the big picture and look at the world around us, you say, well, we're falling behind. China's actually investing more every year now in renewables than we are. They're going to blow North America away, and that's where all the economy is going to happen. So actually money talks, right? So when we see that in China and in Sweden and in Europe, obviously Europe's a bit of an economic turmoil right now too, but they're positioned way better long term than we are, because they already have a lower carbon economy. Their footprint's way lower. So as fossil fuels rise, they're going to be in a better position. So as people start to see that the rest of the world is, as they already are beating us in areas that we used to think we were better at, and they're actually more prosperous than we are, over time, I'm hopeful we're going to see a trend towards better national policy. But in the meantime, we've got pockets of innovation happening in cities all around North America. I'm going to Portland tomorrow for their Eco District Summit. Portland's world class on this stuff. Portland, you put Portland up. Portland isn't in my ranking because they didn't have enough a population to actually make it. But Portland's world class compared to European cities in a lot of things they're doing. So you can have a bold municipal leader surrounded by residents, at least enough of them, who actually get it. Like in Vancouver, we have enough of them that get it, even though we do have a group of residents who don't, and who will fight anything related to green or bike paths or anything that they feel like might be infringement on their rights or something. But there's a majority, I would say the majority of our population embraces it, and so you can have a bold mayor like a Gregor Robertson who says, I'm going to put a stake in the claim, we're going to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. He actually knows they're probably not. But he wanted to have an audacious, bold goal that he could set the city up to everyone could strive for, and they can get as far as they want. So federal level, North America, pathetic. And probably will be for some time, but municipal innovation, New York City, Mayor Bloomberg, he's world class in this stuff. He's the head of the C40 initiative, the Clinton 40 initiative. He gets this stuff incredibly well. He's decided he's going to basically spend he wants to be basically penniless essentially by the time he dies. He wants to give away all his money by the time he dies. He'll live very well until then. But a lot of the money he's investing in is going into these types of solutions we're talking about right now, because he gets it. He just put $50 million in a couple weeks, maybe a month or two ago, into a Stop Coal campaign from the Sierra Club that basically helps fight new coal power plants in the U.S., because he sees that as the 1900s. We're now in the 21st century, and we've got to move our economy to the 21st century. So there are mayors that are bold, that are emboldened by residents. You know, we're lucky in a way that the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast of North America tends to be the most early adopters and the earlier recognizers of these trends and the needs to go more that way. So at a regional level, you know, we've got the WRI, WCI, the Western Climate Initiative, that's starting to take foot with carbon markets being established now. So, but again, that's regional, not federal. So at a regional, local level, we can act. Even at the federal level, we can't.
And you talk about cities as adaptation and mitigation, but I'm wondering, in terms of becoming more resilient, one of the ways to get there is through new build or through retrofits. And obviously, new build has its own carbon intensity and embedded energy that's related to that. So I'm wondering if you can just comment on your vision in terms of resiliency with respect to either new build or retrofitting the existing infrastructure in cities.
Yeah, in general, in the sustainability and the climate world, the best low-hanging fruit is in efficiency gains. And those efficiency gains, even though they're less sexy than, you know, the newest building that's all LEED platinum and all decked out, is finding, you know, better insulation, better windows, more passive design, you know, basic stuff that's not necessarily that expensive but has a really good return on investment. We definitely have to do a massive retrofitting of our infrastructure throughout North America and the world so that it is up to grade, so that it is more efficient, because it is a great bang for the buck in terms of efficiency gain and the revenue saved. We have a small problem in BC. It's a problem and it's a curse and it's a great thing at the same time. We have such great renewable energy and it's so cheap that the ROI isn't as good here on efficiency retrofitting as you'd find in other communities where energy prices are much higher than they are here. I was in Ecuador for that event a month ago or so, and it turns out that high energy consumers, industrial consumers in Ecuador pay up to 60 cents a kilowatt. Here we pay around 7 cents a kilowatt. Solar always makes sense when you get over 20 cents a kilowatt, plus or minus. So imagine, that's a 40-cent margin for solar in Ecuador.